The purpose of tonight's meeting is to talk about the jail tax and to give people an understanding of why many people are standing up against the jail tax, even though sometimes it's a little scary to be one of the ones who says, I don't necessarily want to pass a jail tax, because you've got a lot of opposition that comes from forces that are, they pack guns and they run the jail and they're in charge of the law and justice system. And what we're doing is we're standing up fairly strongly in opposition to the jail tax, because we have a mass incarceration industry that is out of bounds in this country. I've been working on the project for about 7 years. I started as a result of Irene Morgan, and I'm going to talk about her some more in a minute. But I started as the president of the coalition because I've been in business all my life, and I had no interest whatsoever in mass incarceration. I knew nothing about the jail industry. I knew nothing about what was going on in politics. I wasn't even interested. I was busy doing my own thing. And then one day I ended up at a meeting, and I realized that the problem with mass incarceration has actually permeated our entire culture and is causing dysfunction on many, many, many levels. And I decided I would get involved and find out what the problem was. And it's taken me 7 years to feel like I truly have a pretty good grasp on what the problems are that we're facing. And tonight you're going to hear from 4 or 5 different professionals in Whatcom County who also have looked into the jail issue and will be speaking for 5 to 7 minutes, maybe 10 minutes each on the subject. But I want, before I start, to give a quick overview, and I mean very quick. This is a very complicated set of slides. I'm going to do a more in-depth presentation, record it and put it online. But I just want to put the jail industrial complex issue in context so that when you start talking and listening to people who are giving you things that don't fit your paradigm, they don't fit in your brain properly based upon what you've been conditioned to believe, that maybe you'll have a place to look at it and start looking at it from a different viewpoint, because it takes a while to get your mind around it. So I built this slide system. I guess I'm going to stand. Can you guys see it all? No. If you guys, maybe we can move the table. Okay. So you don't have to see the slides for my part, but it will be helpful to see the slides when David goes to speak also. Irene Morgan, after a few years of working on this project, we had been in Olympia, and we had talked to the Department of Corrections and we talked to the Department of Licensing about the fact that people inside the system, when they get out of the prison system, they don't come out with a prisoner ID. I mean, they don't come out with a proper identification badge. And they were arguing about why it's okay that they didn't. All they have to do is go to the Department of Licensing and take their letter and get an ID after they get out. And Irene's talking to her, and she comes back and she said, these people believe that the system works because they're living within the system. And the system works for the system, but the system doesn't work for people when they have to confront the system. And when they're coming out of prison, it doesn't work for them, and what's the problem? So she said, we've been snookered with the whole story we've been taught. And that sort of got my mind looking at that concept. So we have been snookered. The world has changed dramatically. Technology has changed the world. Business has changed the world. Politics has changed the world. The world has changed the world. 9/11 changed the world, and that's what I'm going to talk about just briefly. Go ahead. So in the 20th century, the world moved very, very slow. It's a myth that the world works the same way today that it did just 30 years ago or 20 years ago. It's a completely different reality. We have a 21st century marketplace, and it is a global and international marketplace. Criminal justice, think about that word. We talk about Whatcom County needing a high-quality criminal justice system. Well, think about that. What does your criminal justice system do? That is a biased phrase before you even start the game, because the assumption, the presumption is that just because you got arrested or you went into the system that you're a criminal. That is a prejudiced phrase to start with. True justice is about looking at what happened that happened, and how can we fix it. Then another misnomer in Whatcom County is that we're buying a prison-like facility. They want to build a prison-like facility on 40 acres in the county. And they're talking about people having to live there for long term. That's not true. And I'll talk about the difference between a prison and a jail in just a few minutes. Another thing that people don't understand is that before, 30 years ago, if you called 911 for help, I was actually in the jail, in the law enforcement field back then. And people called us all the time to get help. You had a car that broke down, you had this problem, you had that. That was normal. Today, if you start calling 911, it creates a record, a police record, and eventually that can lead to some really complex predicaments. And people don't even understand that that can happen because it's preposterous. The next thing is that we have civic habits. We have habits of always trusting the authority. We have habits of trusting people when they tell us this, that they're telling us the truth. And what we've learned, what I've discovered, is that just because they say it doesn't mean it's true. In the 21st century, we're dealing with technology. This is a very complex slide. You don't have to read it. None of you can anyway, probably. But technology has changed it. Data mining has made it so that every single time you have a contact with a police officer or emergency services or anything, that creates a physical, technical record. The fact, cover your ass politics or policies. We have created a very litigious society, so everybody is trying to cover themselves. And because of that, we do a lot of things in business and administration that we didn't do 30 or 40 years ago. Privatization of prisons completely changed the business model for how people make money in the jail and the prison industry, and the Patriot Act completely changed everything. There is nothing private anymore. It used to be that you could expunge record. It used to be that you could be somewhat private. You can't do that anymore. That changed the name of the game. Quasi-government, when we privatized prisons and when we got rid of the Antitrust Act, and there are certain civil rights acts and Miranda acts, these things used to be sacred to us. We thought we were protected. Today, it may not be true. And we've created quasi-government multinational organizations that now do contracting with Whatcom County. For example, the Airmark Industries is an international corporation that does business all over the world. They sell all the food to stadiums and colleges, universities, prisons, and they're our contractor in the Whatcom County Jail. And we've dehumanized punishment. I talked briefly about criminal justice, that there is a presumption of guilt. The bias is to find fault, to blame, shame, and put people in jail and then try to rehab them afterwards. A true justice system is intended to establish who caused the problem, who could fix it, what damage was actually caused, and how can we keep people out of the jail system so we can get them back to work, so we can help everyone in the process solve the problem. The difference between a prison and a local jail. A prison is a 356 days or longer holding facility run by state and federal prisons, run by state and federal prisons, and it's intended for people who are convicted of a felony. If it's a misdemeanor, you're convicted of a misdemeanor, you may stay in a local jail, but most of the people who go to jails are there. A high percentage, roughly 80% of the people who are held inside our local jail are people who are not yet convicted or are non-violent to start with. So, and the average length of stay in a jail might be 3 days. In Whatcom County, we went from 9.7 days to 22 days over a period of 20 years. So 22 days inside a jail is not the same at all as 365 days or years inside a prison. So your accommodations have to be very different. But I've done some direct case studies of some people who have gone through the prison system in Whatcom County or the jail system in Whatcom County. And the thing that's distressing is to find out how many people called 911 to get help for their mentally ill child or for a spouse that was having an anger upset or some issue that was going on where they wanted someone to come in and help de-escalate the situation. But what ends up happening, they end up getting arrested, they go into the system once that 911 call is made and a police report starts, it starts a paper trail record of police surveillance and action. And that can actually lead to a very long process inside the jail system. The 911 call is one point where we could do intervention. The arrest, once they're inside the jail, there's 48 to 72 hours that people are left in there without any support, and they're being traumatized the whole time. That's a huge amount of time where we could actually do intervention. At the fast track or the arraignment or the bail hearing, there's another place where we can do intervention. Negotiation and pretrial, that's another set where you can do intervention. But at any point, if you don't have the money to get out of the system, you don't have help to get out of the system, you may end up spending your time there and you end up losing your job and everything else. So our entire system in Whatcom County, I've concluded myself that we have basically a snookery game going on. And to Irene's credit, when she came in and she said it was a snookery, it's not that any one person is necessarily to blame for the problem. It's the fact that we've sort of bought the story that, you know, jails equal public safety, and they don't. Jails can equal trauma, and they can equal damage. So, in Whatcom County, we've spent millions on jail planners. We haven't done a proper needs assessment. We haven't done fiscal accountability reports. We haven't listened to the Vera Institute, the Vera Institute of Justice, when they came back and gave us solutions. We haven't done these things, and yet they're trying to pass $110 million and build a $110 million jail that is on all likelihood going to be closer to 200 to 300 million, and we've got other people who are going to talk about that. But to me, this is systemic failure on our system, and we shouldn't just buy a huge jail that's going to bankrupt us. So